Hey everybody, I apologize for the technical difficulties. We got everything back up and running. I'm not sure if you guys are going to be able to see this live. If not, we'll make sure that we add it to the website and you guys can check it out later on. But we got cut off when we started talking about first baseman. So the first guy I wanted to mention, the last guy I was mentioning before everything got cut off, was Goldie. We're going to have Paul Goldschmidt today, 348 versus left-handed batters so far this year. He hit 384 against them last season. Goes up against John Neese of the Mets. Hits in a good hitter's park. They're in Arizona. So he is probably the one guy today that I would pay up for at first base. Arizona has a big run total. They're expecting a lot of runs out of that game. And whenever Arizona's scoring a lot of runs, you know Goldie always has a piece of it. The next guy I wanted to mention is Mark Teixeira. Teixeira is a little bit under the radar today. He's basically been a little bit under the radar all season. And he's more of a tournament play for me than a cash game play. Teixeira has 16 home runs, which doesn't put him very far behind guys who are leading the league like Bryce Harper with his 18. But you're usually able to get Tex at a much cheaper price than a guy like Harper is. Basically, he's a left-handed batter playing at home in Yankee Stadium. Goes up against Jared Weaver. Now, Teixeira has had a little bit of trouble lately catching up with some of the fastballs, but Jared Weaver's fastball doesn't even get over 90 miles an hour anymore. So I definitely don't think Weaver's going to be a guy who can overpower him. And Tex is a very professional hitter. If he can get one ball that he can lift into the outfield today and hit a home run, he's basically going to return value for you on any site that you might want to use him on today. There are two other guys at first base who I think are in play. One of them is Brandon Belt, who's a left-handed batter going up against Jerome Williams. That game is in Philly, which is a really good hitter's ballpark. And again, he hits right in the middle of that order. He's usually in the 5 spot. Left-handed batter against a weak right-handed pitcher. He hits right-handed pitching pretty well, and he has a little bit of power. So in a home run ballpark like that, I definitely think Belt's another guy who's going to be in play. The cheap option who you can roll out today, if that Colorado-Miami game goes off, is definitely Justin Bour. Bour is 3,100 over on FanDuel. I think he's 3,700 or 3,500 over on DraftKings. Again, he's the cleanup hitter right now. He's a left-handed batter. He's been playing well. He goes up against Eddie Butler, who's a right-handed pitcher that struggles with basically everybody. And the game is being played in Coors Field. So there's a lot to like with a guy like Bour. I like him a little bit more, I think, in tournaments than I do for cash today. But again, anytime you can get a guy in Coors Field batting cleanup that's that cheap, you know, he's somebody that you have to consider. I'm not gonna recommend him, but I'm not gonna argue against anybody who wants to roll him out there either. The problem with rolling out a cheap first baseman is you're basically saying that that guy's going to outperform a lot of the big bats on the day like today, or at least do well enough to not hurt you. And I don't know if I could see Bour having a home run and 25 to 30 point upside today, which I don't know which first baseman is going to give you 20 to 30 points today, but pretty much every day, a power position like first base, you wind up with at least one guy who does that. So if you're going to go cheap, what you're basically doing is hoping that none of the big guys pay off, and you're still going to be able to do what you have to do, you know, with the cheap guy down there and using that salary elsewhere. On a small slate, I think that's a strategy that works better because you're only fading maybe one or two stud first basemen. But on a large slate like today, where you have 15 games and every team is in play, you know, you're basically fading a handful of first basemen and hoping they all do bad. And on top of it, you're hoping that Bour does have a big game. So it's a little bit of a risky strategy for a cash game, but for a tournament, I definitely think he's a cheap guy that you can use to fit in some bigger price bats elsewhere. Moving on to second base, there are really three guys I like at second base. The first one is Dee Gordon, playing in that same Miami-Colorado game. He's been hitting this so well this year. He's been hitting over 300 this year. He's been hitting it against right-handed and left-handed batters. And this is a guy that has a ton of speed. So when he gets on base, he's always a threat to steal, always a threat to score runs, to go, you know, first to third or second to home. I mean, there's a lot of upside with a guy like this. There's a lot that you can like. Moving on from Dee Gordon, the other two guys who I've been using, and they're about the same price on FanDuel. I think one is still a little more expensive than the other on DraftKings. On DraftKings, I think Logan Forsythe is cheaper. He's going up against a left-handed pitcher today. Anytime we can get Forsythe against a left-handed pitcher, it's something that we want to consider. He's usually batting cleanup in that order, in a really good spot for him. And I definitely think that's somebody who, who we want to be able to roll out in our lineups today. The other guy is Ben Zobrist. Pretty much the same situation. He gets his preferred split today. Batted 340 against him last year. This year, he hasn't done as well, but remember, we missed a big part of the season with Zobrist. He was out for about a month and a half or two. Now that he's back, he's up towards the top of that Oakland lineup. He's somebody who doesn't really have a ton of power. He's more of an average guy, but he does pick up a lot of hits. He does score a bunch of runs. And if he's batting in that 2 or 3 hole, he might even have a chance to drive in a few guys today. Moving on from there, going to third base. The third baseman who I like the most today is Evan Longoria. Longoria is another guy who's always done well against lefties in his lifetime. He has about a 298 average against them last year and a cumulative average of about 300 against left-handed pitching since 2012. He gets a matchup with J.A. Happ, who has struggled some with right-handed hitters. And Longoria should remain somewhere in the 3 or 4 hole in that order. And basically that entire team is better against left-handed pitching. So I think that they're going to be a sneaky stack today if you want to put some of those Tampa Bay guys together and, try to roll with that in some of your tournaments. I think they're going to be a team that puts some points on the board. And if that's the case, you got to think that the guys in the middle of that order, like Forsythe, like Longoria, are going to have something to do with that. Now, the other guy that I wanted to mention at third base is somebody that a lot of you may have forgotten about, and that's Anthony Rendon. Rendon has basically been hurt for the entire season. And he was a guy last year who played very well in that second and third base role over on DraftKings, second and third base role for the Washington Nationals. He's pretty much become their everyday third baseman, which is where he's going to be, and I think the only place where you're still able to use him on both DraftKings and FanDuel. He came back yesterday. First game back, he went 2 for 4, picked up right where he left off last season and reminded everybody why he was a guy that we used a lot last year in daily fantasy until his salary got to be to the point where it was a little ridiculous. As long as his salary remains low here and he's in a pretty decent matchup, I think he's somebody that you want to use. He hit .313 last year against left-handed pitching, so I definitely think that he's somebody that's going to be in play today. And with him only coming back yesterday, I also think he's going under a lot of people's radars. So a guy like Anthony Rendon could be somebody to roll out in both a cash or GPP game and, give yourself some differentiation without really taking too much risk on, which is what we really like when we're looking for a good guy to swerve off to. Moving on from there, there's one shortstop today who I'm using all over, and that's Troy Tulowitzki. I mean, we all knew it was only a matter of time before this guy got back to the numbers that he's been used to showing us. He is 10 of his last 20 during the last 5 games. That includes 4 home runs, 10 RBIs, and 7 runs scored. He has a few walks as well to top it off. So he's averaging just shy of 8 fantasy points per game over on FanDuel, which is ridiculous. That translates into closer to 20 points per game over on DraftKings, which is even more ridiculous. And the thing about Tulo is he's probably the best shortstop option you can have by a wide margin today. Even a so-so game from Tulo is probably better and safer than expecting a big game out of some of these cheap shortstop punts that you take. Especially if you're coming off a guy who's batting cleanup or third in his lineup and, taking a guy who's either a leadoff hitter or somebody who's hitting 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th. You're definitely better off with a guy like Tulo locking up some of those points. Again, he's got a good matchup against Kohler. He's in a good hitter's park in Coors Field, and the guy has been absolutely on fire. So there's really no reason not to use Tulo today. It looks like Tulo's back to the guy we expected him to be after a little bit of a slump. And, man, 4 home runs in the past 5 games, 20 at-bats, 10 hits. He's broken out of this thing in pretty good fashion today. Moving on from him, going on to the outfield. Like I said, there are a ton of outfield options that you guys can choose today. The first one I want to mention, though, is somebody who I think is flying a little bit under the radar, and that's Joey Batista. FanDuel really seems to have adjusted prices up, significantly, as I've said to you. And while I was looking around at the top options today, there weren't a ton of the guys that were really expensive that stood out to me as guys that I think are also someone who's going to get you value. Joey Batista is probably the one guy here who I think makes a lot of sense and could fit in for cash and GPPs. Plays in a great home run park up there in Toronto. He basically plays against a pitcher who so far this year, in Roberto Hernandez, has given up a home run every 5 innings to right-handed batters. So if you take a right-handed power bat like Joey Batista, put him in his home field where he likes to hit, and put him up against a pitcher who's been giving him up so far to right-handed batters, I think it's a pretty good combination of things today to have in your lineup. Again, Batista's numbers, are always better at home. So when he's hitting in the Rogers Center and he has a good matchup, he's somebody that I like to use. And based on the home run upside that I think he has, as opposed to some of the other guys today, I think he's probably one of my top options in the outfield position. There are other guys here who I'm going to mention who are guys that you're going to need to fit into your lineup in order to make things work. AJ Pollock is the next one I really like. Rath mentioned him this morning. Goes up against John Neese. John Neese has been horrible in his last couple games. He has -10 on DraftKings and 3 other scores of 7, 5, and 2. So basically over the course of his last 4 games, he has averaged 1.4 DraftKings points per game, which is one of the worst I've ever seen. Not only does that say to me that he's not somebody you want to target, but it tells me that he's a good guy you want to target against. I wouldn't even argue with somebody who wanted to roll out an Arizona Diamondback stack today and try to take advantage of how bad Neese has been. Pollock is a guy who has a 475 WOBA against left-handed pitching right now, so he's basically been mashing. He most likely will be batting either in the 2-hole right in front of Goldie or in the 4-hole behind them. They traded Trumbo away yesterday, so it's going to be interesting to see how they juggle that lineup around. My guess would be that against, in a matchup like they have today, they'll probably have Pollock and Inciarte up top, followed by Goldie, maybe with a guy like David Peralta in the 4 spot. But like I said, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. So let's all, keep an eye on it when the rosters come out. And, basically if you see Pollock in the top 3 in the batting order, with the WOBA that he has right there, he's somebody I definitely want to have in my lineups. 2 of the other guys, cheap options who I think you can look at, Gerardo Parra at $2,500. He's got a good lefty-righty split today. And the thing I like about Parra is with Braun out, he's going to be not only in the lineup a lot, but he's going to be hitting in that 2-hole. The reason they hit him in that 2-hole is he's a left-handed batter, so he splits up the 2 righties that hit around him, which is usually, Carlos Gomez. And then they have been putting other guys in the leadoff spot, but and Lucroy 5th. But I think eventually they're going to go back to Gomez in 1st, Parra in 2nd, and Lucroy in 3rd once Lucroy gets another game or 2 under his belt. I think that could happen today as well. So I think if you got Parra sandwiched between guys like Gomez and Lucroy, he's going to see a lot of pitches to hit, and he's the one that has the good splits matchup today. So he's another guy I think you can roll out there. He's $2,500 over on FanDuel. I don't have his price over on DraftKings, but I can't imagine that he's too expensive today. But if you can get him for $3,500 or below on DraftKings, I think he's a guy that you want to make sure you have in your lineups. The other guy who I think you got to use is Joey Butler. If you don't know about this guy yet, you need to go look at his stats and you need to start taking notice. He's a right-handed batter who's been basically smashing everybody over the past week or so. He was a minimum price guy, and he's basically had such outsized returns that all the sites have jacked his price up. He's $33,000 right now on FanDuel, which I still think is cheap. And I think he's nearing $4,000 now over on DraftKings, somewhere like 37, maybe. I forget exactly what his price was over there. But he's not cheap over there either. But again, he's been producing, so you really can't complain. He hit over 350 so far in his young career against left-handed pitching. And he's got 12 hits in his last 24 at-bats over his last 6 games. So he's averaging about 5.3 FanDuel points per game, putting up double-digit points over on DraftKings pretty much regularly. I mean, this is a guy, like I said, if you don't have him in your lineup now, you want to keep an eye on him. He goes up against J.A. Happ. J.A. Happ's a left-handed pitcher, so he has the lefty-righty splits going today. I definitely think that there's a lot of upside with him. The ballpark is a little bit of a factor, but again, his home park isn't all that great anyway, so moving up to Safeco, I don't think is going to be – I think it'll hurt, but I don't think it's going to be the worst thing in the world for him, and especially with how hot this guy's been lately. So that kind of gives you a rundown of some of the bats that we like today. Let's get into how we're going to be building our teams tonight. Basically, if you're playing in cash, I think the safest pitcher you can use is Jake Odorizzi. He's the guy who I'm going to be building a lot of my cash games around, and a lot of my games on a one-pitcher site are going to be built around Odorizzi as well. He is probably my top play at the starting pitcher position, and I will use him in both cash and tournaments today. For GPP upside, I think the guy you want to look at is Carlos Martinez. Now, again, I know that he has a tough matchup with that Dodgers team, but Martinez is a guy who is a high strikeout potential guy, and he's going up against that Dodgers team that, basically is in the middle of the pack for strikeouts, but they do hit right-handed pitching well. So it's not a matchup that I think a ton of people are going to be on. So I think you might be getting probably the most talented pitcher on the board at a low ownership rate today, which is exactly what we want when we're playing in our tournaments. I wouldn't use him in a cash game today because, again, that is a tough matchup with the Dodgers. So Martinez is a guy who I like more for the upside that he can give you in a tournament style play. Who else do we have here? Cheap guys that you can consider. You got guys like Tayoshi Wada and Sean Markham. If I'm playing on DraftKings, I definitely think I'm going to have at least one roster with a guy like Markham in there. He's just too cheap at 4,300. I don't expect him to go out there and get me 30, 35 points, but I think he can get me close to 20. Even if he gets me 15 at 4,300, that's still going to be a pretty good return on his, on his salary. So I think you can use him in a cash game today. I also think you can use him in a tournament for, to kind of give you that upside. I actually think I like him better in cash because I think that there's a couple pitchers today who are going to be highly owned that are going to blow up. So if you have a guy like Markham in cash where other people are spending up on a Carlos Martinez or somebody else anywhere between Markham and Martinez that does underperform, if you have Markham and he gets you that 15 to 20 points, you're not going to lose much in terms of your fantasy score, but you're going to gain a lot in salary that you can get some better bats at the other positions and probably dominate those cash games against somebody else. When we're talking about those bats and the bats that we want to throw into our lineup today, two guys who I'm going to have in a lot of my lineups are Paul Goldschmidt and Troy Tulowitzki. If I can get Goldie and Tulo into most of my lineups, that's going to be something that I try to do. And then there's a lot of bats that you can put around them. I mean, you can stack Arizona bats against John Neese. You can go with Blue Jays bats against Roberto Hernandez. San Francisco has a good matchup with Jerome Williams. Anybody playing in that Miami-Colorado game is going to be in play because that game's taking place at Coors Field. If you go with the Detroit Tigers against Quintana, I think that one's going to be a little bit under the radar. You got a left-handed pitcher going up against that righty-dominant lineup. I think they might be able to do some damage to him, and I haven't heard anybody talking about them at all today. So I think that there's enough upside with that Detroit Tigers stack that they could be another one of those sneaky ones for you to use if you're trying to take down one of these big tournaments. For cash, though, I'm basically stuck on the two pitcher sites. On a one pitcher site, like I said, Odorizzi seems to be an easy answer for me. On two pitcher sites, I don't know. I mean, I kind of like a guy like Volquez. He's been somebody I've been rolling out there for a little bit of salary saving. Like I said, I don't really like Carlos Martinez, who I think a lot of people are going to be on tonight. And that's another reason why I'm not really loving him. And I'd actually rather try to beat him in my cash games than just take him for the block because I don't see a huge upside game coming from him. He might still get 20, 25 points, but I don't think that's going to be great. And basically at the price, I think you can probably do better. So that kind of wraps it up. That's pretty much how I'm going to be building my teams today over there on FanDuel and DraftKings and Fantasy Aces. Remember, we also have that $250 free roll going on today. So make sure you get over to the RotoCurve lobby and sign up for that. It's let's see, let me get all the details here for you. Fantasy score, $250 free roll with a 50% bonus up to $250. And this is an instant bonus. It's not one of those slow drip, play off $100 and get $5 or $10 back. When you put your $100 deposit or $250 deposit in, they're giving you that 50% right away, right off the bat for you to play with. So that's something that you don't get from a lot of other sites. So we want to give a big shout out to the guys over at Fantasy Score. We think they're doing the right thing over there, and that's why we're going to promote them and, throw it out there for you guys, run some free rolls over there, do some discussion of some of their salary and stuff like that. The guys over there, like I said earlier, really want feedback. So if you guys go and play and there's something you like or don't like about the site, please make sure that you either throw something up in our forum or send them an email so that this way they can know some of the things that they can improve on, because they are trying to make the best experience possible for the players. But that about wraps it up for us here today on The Curve. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. I don't know why my internet connection went out, but wanted to make sure I got it back and finished off all those hitters for you guys so you had some idea what to do. And lucky it's still very early in the day. We got a late lock on the start of these games, so plenty of time for you to watch both these videos and put everything together and start building your teams. Again, you can follow us over at RotoCurve on Twitter. You can join up on the site if you haven't already at www.rotocurve.com. You can follow me. My name is Benny Ricciardi. I go by @BennyR11 on Twitter, or follow my partner, Josh Kalachi, who's running the chat for us today. And he goes by @JoshKalachi over on Twitter. Follow us. You guys get some updates. As you know, we tweet out stuff throughout the day as we see it, as we see daily fantasy information. We'll make sure we get it out there to you guys so you can do what you got to do and hopefully make some money. So again, for Josh in the chat and everybody else over here at RotoCurve, we appreciate you guys joining us and us being part of your daily fantasy research for the day. And as always, we want to tell you guys to stay classy DFS. Good luck tonight, make some money, and have a good day.